Hi, my name's Sawyer Wilson. I'm making this video from my Native American music class. I'm going to talk a little bit about the way that Native American cultures and people are misappropriated and misrepresented in American modern culture and pop culture, such as music, movies, sports, and stuff like that. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So Western people, Americans, particularly white people, have been fascinated with Native Americans or just people who are different from them in general for centuries, ever since they discovered the New World. And this fascination has led to the creation of different types of entertainment, movies, books, music, anything, performances, anything you could think of. But unfortunately, these performances have often misrepresented the groups that they're portraying, which has changed the way these groups are perceived in public opinion, in education, in anything. And so it's important to understand the way these misappropriations and misrepresentations take place, to understand the issues that arise from them, so we can start deconstructing that and start, seeing people for the way they are, what's true, and separating what's fake. So like I said, Native American people and their cultures are often misrepresented in pop culture in American society today. So there's a few terms that are important to understanding the way these misrepresentations take place and the way these people are falsely portrayed. So the terms that I'm going to talk about a little bit are cultural misappropriation, cultural confusion, racial antipathy, idealized sympathy, playing Indian, singing redface, and blackface minstrelsy. So we'll start with cultural misappropriation. And appropriation is defined as something developed in one cultural context but is used by someone who belongs to another culture. So, I think we hear about cultural appropriation a lot in our society today, whether it's, Halloween costumes where people try to dress up as Native Americans, or people dressing up in traditional Asian wear, anything like that. We see cultural appropriation all the time. So cultural misappropriation is sort of a different version of that. It's just where people are being represented in a false way by someone who's not from that culture. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today is cultural misappropriation. So where the white people, Americans, are representing Native Americans in a false way is cultural misappropriation. And after cultural misappropriation is cultural confusion. And it's a little bit different, and it kind of arises from cultural misappropriation. So cultural misappropriation creates all this false information, and then for so many people in American society today, that false information is the only information. So that means that those false representations of Native American people, or any people, but just for this instance, Native American people, is the only representation they have. So that becomes, for them, the true representation. So that's cultural confusion is affected by all the false information that we have that comes from cultural misappropriation. All right, so next is racial antipathy, and it's a fairly simple term. It's pretty much a strong feeling of dislike or hatred or anything towards someone based upon their race. So any racist feelings towards someone. And these lead to stereotypes, which become the characterizations in misappropriation, which lead to cultural confusion. So racial antipathy and stereotypes are often performed through art, and they represent in popular culture, which unfortunately become problematic because it gives the illusion that it's representing this specific group, which in reality it's not. And then idealized sympathy is the feeling of sympathy for an imaginary group or culture, in this case Native American caricatures. So it's when we create, or when society creates, those false ideals of Native American culture, and then we as the public, as people, sympathize with those characters, those caricatures that we see in music, in movies, in TV, when in reality they're not even real. So we're engaging with a misrepresentation. So the next term is playing Indian, and this term has been around for a long time. Maybe not the term itself, but the concept. It arises from that infatuation that came from Westerners discovering the New World and interacting with Native American people that are different than them. So playing Indian, it can be anything as obvious and as explicit as dressing up in a white person dressing up in Native American clothes, pretending to be an Indian in a movie or anything like that. or it can be in a song where you're using Native American words, culture, language, things like that. So playing Indian is pretty much a person who's not Indian portraying that they are, is a simple way to explain. So the next term is singing red face, and singing red face occurs when a non-native person takes on the racial archetype of a Native American character through song. And so artists who engage in singing red face, they make inauthentic Native American music that promotes racial slurs and mocks Native languages. And we'll talk about an example of that here in a little bit. And so the last term is blackface minstrelsy, and this kind of provides like background information on the entertainment and how like playing Indian and singing red face has came about. So blackface minstrelsy, it was an early form of American entertainment where stereotypes of African Americans were performed, and usually by white people, whether in blackface specifically or in other ways as well. But they were performed and developed into these racial stereotypes and archetypes that create these false ideals similar to those that are created through singing red face. And so that's how the idea of portraying someone different than yourself or the other in entertainment, that's where that came from. All right, so now that we've got somewhat of an understanding of these terms and the ways misappropriation and misrepresentation occurs in our society today, I just got a few examples that I want to talk about pretty quick. So I'll have one example from music, one example from movie entertainment industry, and then one example from sports. So we'll talk about those. So the first example comes from the music industry, and it's an example of a song from Annette Funicello, and the song is called Indian Giver. It came out in 1961, and Annette Funicello, she was a young singer actress. She was known as like an American sweetheart and all sorts of stuff like that. And then this Indian Giver song, it portrayed a lot of stereotypes about Native Americans, such as, just the term of being an Indian giver, like giving away something and then later wanting it back. In this instance, she was talking about a man gave a young girl her heart and then wanted it back later. So that was the whole theme of the song, Indian Giver. And then the song also used offensive language, such as the word squaw, which is used as a racial slur against Native American people for a long time. It's been used. So that's one example, and that's an example of singing red face, and it's just misappropriation of Native American people through stereotypes in a popular music song from the 60s, which at the time was pretty popular. She was a well-known artist. And stuff like this continues up until today, but that's just one example. So after the music and Annette Funicello's song, which was an example of seeing red face and misappropriation, another example of misappropriation comes from the movie industry. And it starts out in the early 20th century with the story of Peter Pan, which obviously wasn't a movie right away, but later became a movie in the 1950s through Disney and has been remade into several other movies later. But so this story of Peter Pan, it portrays this tribe on the island of Neverland known as the Pickaninny Warriors. And this tribe, the Warriors, obviously is meant to represent a stereotyped and offensive portrayal of Native Americans just through the way they dress, through their names. For example, in the 1953 film, the leader of this tribe is called Indian Chief. And, the way they speak is kind of mocking of Native American language. And there's even a song in the 1953 film called What Made the Red Men Red. So it's obvious that these racist and stereotypical undertones were present in these stories. Yes, it was a long time ago. It was 50, 60 years ago, but it's still present today because obviously Peter Pan is something that is still popular. It's been remade several times, and it seems to be a little less racially driven against the Native American groups and influenced by that, but still is present today as well. All right, so the last example I want to mention is another form of misappropriation, which is really, really common in today's society. We see it probably almost every day, if not every week, but it's often forgotten, and that's through the mascots of professional and amateur sports teams, such as Kansas City Chiefs, Cincinnati Reds, Atlanta Braves. I can think of lots of others. I'm sure you can too. But so these names, they're based upon these ideas of Native Americans that we've created through misappropriation, through misrepresentation, and the names are offensive, the mascots, they're insensitive, and that's just another way that those are still present today because we see the song from Annette Funicelli from the 1960s, and we see the Peter Pan movie from the 1950s, and we think, that's so long ago, it's not still a problem today. But then we see those sports teams' mascots as an example how it's still present today. So in conclusion, American music, media, movies, sports, and other aspects of popular culture have stereotyped, misappropriated, and misrepresented Native American cultures for centuries. With a better understanding of the ways these false and often offensive representations and the problems that arise from them, we can begin to deconstruct it. So that's why it's important to understand some of the terms that we talked about earlier, like cultural misappropriation, cultural confusion, racial antipathy, idealized sympathy, playing Indian, singing red face, and blackface minstrelsy. Because once we understand those, we can recognize it and start to deconstruct it. And then it's also important for us to recognize and acknowledge examples of this in society, such as the Annette Funicelli song that I talked about, the Peter Pan movie, and the sports teams, because these examples of stereotyping in music, movies, sports, and other forms of entertainment, it's crucial that we recognize these to begin deconstructing and stopping the misappropriation of Native American people and cultures in modern American society.